time to paint. If this is your first time holding a can of spray paint, I just want to say that I'm really excited for you. And don't come at me if nobody can prise this from your dead cold fingers, okay? So before we start to put together pieces of artwork, I want to talk about the fundamentals of using a can of spray paint. Today we're going to talk about can control and layering of paint. When you grab a can of paint to start for the day, whether it's a brand new one or whether it's one you've just had lying on the side for a little while, you need to make sure you're pulling some of the paint through before you use it. I recommend having a surface for this that you regularly use near you all the time. This could be something like a piece of paper, or if you're like me, you go for something more permanent. I have a board right next to me here that I use to pull through paint. So we're grabbing a new can, and the first thing we're going to do, of course, is give it a good shake. Then we come to our surface that we pull the paint through on, and we're just going to pull through a few shots of paint until it's coming through nice and opaque. All the pigment should be coming through, it shouldn't be murky at all. You can do this for all the cans you're going to use before you start, or just as you pick up new cans, make sure you pull a bit through before you start painting. This first part may seem obvious, but we're going to start with how to hold a can of spray paint. You want to hold the can in your strongest hand, so I'm right-handed, so it goes here. Whether you're left-handed or right-handed, you want to use your index finger, the one closest to your thumb, on the cap itself. This may seem obvious, but I've seen people before using their middle finger on a cap, and then you end up with this weird like raptor claw. Like, what's this guy doing? Like, this is definitely the most comfortable position. The next thing you want to look at is finger placement. Obviously your finger goes on the top here, but a common mistake people make is they let their finger overhang the cap like this. This is especially relevant if you have gloves on and you've not put them on properly. So for example, if I didn't have this finger all the way through, if I then go to put my finger on the cap, it's in the right place, but I'm getting this overhang on the glove, you see? This isn't even just a beginner thing. Sometimes it happens to me. Remember, you're looking this way, so I can't really see that my glove's overhanging the cap. Problem, of course, is when you start to use the paint, you'll end up eventually with nice big old drips all over your painting, because the paint is actually bouncing off your glove or your finger. So make sure that glove is on nice and tight and your finger is not overhanging the end of the cap. In some cases the cap will have a little ridge at the end, which is handy because your finger can just butt up against the end of it. Some other caps only have a tiny little ridge, and some caps don't have a ridge at all, so just always be aware of where your finger is placed on the can. The angle you hold the can at is also really important. On every can of spray paint, from the cap here, there's a little tube running all the way to the bottom, and that's where it's pulling the paint from. So you'll see on the instructions of any can that it says to hold the can upright all the time. That's because when you're holding it upright, the paint can fall to the bottom and it can pull everything up through the tube. Now obviously you can't hold a can all the way upright when you're painting something that's below you, so you're going to have to angle it down. The more time you spend holding the can at an angle, the more opportunity the paint has got to go to the top end of the can. And after a while, what you'll notice is that you start losing pressure and the amount of paint that's coming out and hitting your page. If this happens, don't worry, just turn the can upright, spray some off to the side, and then straight away it will start pulling the paint through at the right pace. The next thing to consider is the distance from your medium. How far away are you holding the can when spraying? The recommendations on most spray paint cans will be a distance between 15 and 30 centimeters away from your surface. But for spray paint art, you want to throw the guides out the window because it varies depending on what you're doing. The distance you are away from the page will affect how much paint is concentrated into one area. So if I'm right next to the medium and give it a spray, you'll see it's really concentrated here. If I hold it 5 centimeters from the page, you get something like this. You're going to get a bit more haze around where the paint's hit. So here's 10 centimeters. The dot is really starting to fan out now. 15, 20, and 30 centimeters. Where I've written 30 centimeters here is actually where the paint starts to stop hitting the page. So you can see it fans right out the further away you are. I don't want you to get bogged down with the exact measurements because you're going to be using this whole range of distances when you create spray paint art. As you practice, you'll have a distance from the page that you naturally go to, and this is different for everyone. For me, if I was naturally just going to start painting on this page, I would probably go in about here. So measuring that out, I shoot about 13 centimeters from the page. The first thing I want you to try is grab yourself a big sheet of paper and have a go at shooting the paint at these distances roughly. I just use this old ruler, you can use a tape measure or whatever. Then I want you to just naturally come to the page and shoot a few shots at it and measure up what your natural distance is. Not that it matters, but feed this back, I'll be interested to know. Now we're going to move on to what I believe is the most important skill when learning spray paint art, is your movement and control of paint coming from the can. If you don't practice the correct movement and get a control of how much paint is hitting the page, I guarantee you your paintings will just become a mess very quickly. Before I show you how to do this right, I want to tell you why most people get this wrong. A lot of the time when you see spray paint artists working on the street, it's really fast paced and everything's happening super quickly. Bear in mind that that speed is something that they have learned over time as they've progressed their journey, and you will do the same. But if you go in looking for ultra fast speed like you've seen other artists do, you're more likely to make a mistake. So let's break it down and show you what to practice. The best way to start is Controlled burst with constant movement. Let me show you what I mean by that. So we're adding little bursts of paint to the page like this, and see how my hand is constantly moving. This allows me to lay paint down in an area without laying too much down. And if I want to increase an amount of paint in an area, I can just come back over that with more controlled bursts. In the end, I will end up with nice even coverage of the area, and I can always add more if I want. Remember, it's always easier to add more than it is to take away. This is good. Down here, I'm going to try and achieve the same thing, but I'm going to do it the wrong way. Instead of controlled bursts and constant movement, I'm going to show you a single burst and not a lot of movement to achieve the same sort of coverage. Some might say we've achieved a similar result. We've covered the page in a similar sort of area. This is bad for so many reasons. Firstly, I've ended up pooling the paint so much that I can still see it running across the page. It's got nowhere to go. Secondly, this is going to take ages to dry. When you eventually want to pick up the pace with your work, you are never going to be able to do that with something that takes so long to dry. It's also a complete unnecessary waste of paint, and I'm going to demonstrate that by showing how much I can actually scoop off the page right now. That is complete overkill. And finally, if I wanted to texture this and layer the paint on top of it, even if I applied the next layer in the right way, this is just going to pull together and it's going to split, and the pigment is not going to work when we come to texture it. There's so much black pigment here that this white can't cope with it, which is why you're getting this splitting effect. And if I go to manipulate this, it's just turning into a grey soup. Way too much paint. This is bad. Now I'm going to show you how I want you to practice this. Take a fairly sizable blank page and put 2 plates on it. Just dust an outline around those and then you can take them off. Now grab a pen or marker or whatever, and I just want you to draw a diagonal line across each of the circles. Now I want you to colour in half of each circle the best you can using controlled burst and constant movement. So you're going to colour in the bottom right half of the first circle, and to make sure you're practicing all angles, you're going to colour the top left half of the other circle. Then assess what you've done. Is there any pooling? Is paint running around? Does it look too thick in places? You might even discover that you've not put quite enough down in places, so come back in and try to tidy up that detail. This is the level of consistency that we want the paint to be at. We could easily lay on top of this. It's not going to dry too quickly, and we've still covered all of the page. And guess what? This exercise had nothing to do with colouring in, so if you go over this line, I promise you, nobody cares. Your can control and achieving the right consistency of paint is all that matters. And just to prove it, I'm going to layer some white on here. You see, we're not getting that same splitting effect as we did before, and if I wanted to pull some of this off, you can see that the pigments complement each other well. It's not turning into soup, and we could make some nice texture from this. Practice this technique as many times as you need to, and come back to me with the results. I'd love to see. Now we've got our can control locked in, it's time to see what happens when we layer paints together. One of the best things about layering spray paint is because of the way the paint works, you can make different paints complement each other really well. Layering up paint correctly is an essential skill in spray paint art. The first thing you want to consider is using the same brands wherever possible. Sometimes different brands of paint can react badly with each other, and it causes that splitting effect that we saw before. If you're unsure what's going to happen when using 2 different brands, take a spare piece of card and just run a little test area before you start anything on your actual painting. Now what I'm seeing here, you see how this white is just disappearing? It's not a great reaction, to be honest. I probably wouldn't use those 2 brands together. Whereas if I remove the store brand and swap it for the same brand in white, let's see the difference. You see that making that swap has a totally different result, and I would definitely choose to use the loop paints together. Whereas through experience, I know that if I take this Montana Gold paint, layer up the store brand on top, you can see that I don't get the same reaction, and I know these paints work well together. You'll discover this for yourself with the paints you use over time. Now that we know our paints will layer without an issue, I'll show you a couple of little techniques where layering paint really helps with spray paint art. Because of the nature of spray paint, one of the best ways to layer up paint is to fade it together. Let me show you. So let's say here that I'm just going to very badly paint some mountains. Notice how I'm using controlled bursts and I'm always moving the can. Now I'm going to use the spray paint to my advantage by angling the can this way and just lightly dusting some of the white across the face of these mountains. Maybe some up through the peaks as well here. If you check out the detail here, you can see that because of the way that I've angled the can, it's allowed some natural mist to just flow across these mountains. And this is just one of the ways that layering can make your spray paint art look amazing. And we can layer more on top of that. So let's say I'm going to add some hills in here. Controlled bursts, always moving the can. Just by adding another layer to this, I'm already starting to create a full scene here. Now the most common reason that we layer our paint is for texture. Let's just say I'm going to have a big rock right in the middle here. Now the first thing to consider when layering for texture is the drying time. Sometimes if I lay the paint on too quickly, it might mix together, and that's not necessarily what I want. I'm looking primarily at the level of glossiness here, and that's going to tell me how dry the paint is by eye. You can also test an area if you like, just by popping your finger in it and just seeing how wet it is. This is obviously still really wet. I don't want this to dry completely because then I might get too much separation between the white and the black. So you want it not too wet that it will mix straight away, but wet enough of course so that it will blend nicely. We'll come on to different types of texture in the next module, but just to give you an idea, I'm just going to use my finger here to create some different types of textures on our rock. In this swiping motion here, it's mixing, and that's because the paint's still wet enough to combine. But if I want to just take some of the white away, I'm able to do that. The most important thing is that it blends really nicely so you get enough of the highlights and shadows still when you're creating that texture. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, but I'm going to let this dry a lot more and show you the difference. You'll notice here, because it's a lot more dry, the white is now wanting to lift away from the black completely rather than blending together. Here's how I want you to practice layering. Outline your 2 circles. Firstly, we're going to use our can control to colour in the bottom right half of each circle. Then you're going to practice can control again by adding a white faded highlight to the bottom of these. Then see how well you've layered it. Is the fade good? Now cover the top halves, but you're going to reverse it. Now we're going to colour in the top halves, but you're going to reverse it. So black on this one, white on this one. Now you're going to let the white naturally dry longer than you are while you're playing with the black. So lay up some white on top straight away. Just see what kind of textures you can make with just your hand. Just play with it. You're not trying to make anything here. Now lay some black over this one and just leave it to dry for a little bit. You should definitely notice the different effect you get with a drier paint. Just be sure to practice these techniques as many times as you need to until you get a full understanding of how your paint layers up. Now you've discovered that can control is everything, you can go on to create some amazing spray paint art. I guarantee it. If you want access to the entirety of this course for free, all in one place, I'll leave a link down in the description box to the Canvas Vandals. Canvas Vandals is my community of artists all over the world looking to up their game with spray paint art. And you can share all of your progress right inside of the community so I can see how you're getting on with your work and give you some feedback. In the next video, I'm going to show you how to add texture to your spray paint art. And trust me when I say, this is going to change the way you see the art world. That video is right here, or just go to the link in the description if you want all of the course right now. See you there.